Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cavan-Smith. Tonight, Tanzania insists that it is safe for Burundian refugees to head back home. It's going to start repatriating the hundreds of thousands of people who fled over the border to escape political turmoil in Burundi over the last 4 years. Also, the wait continues. Sudan's expecting its first cabinet since the fall of Omar al-Bashir to be named. It's a key step in moving forward from recent political and social upheaval. And in Sierra Leone's crowded capital, people moving to slum areas have run out of space for building new houses. Many are turning to banking, which is land reclamation by packing plastic waste so solidly that houses can be built on it. It's a technique that is not without risk. We take a closer look. But first, Tanzania is set on starting sending Burundian refugees back home from October the 1st, whether they want to go or not. Over the last 4 years, more than 200,000 people have tried to escape political unrest in Burundi by fleeing over the border into Tanzania. Its government says that it's now time for refugees to be repatriated because their homeland is now safe. The UN reckons, though, that hundreds of people are still leaving Burundi every month. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
Tanzania says that the situation in Burundi has improved. That's why the refugees can go home. Also, the government is trying to please some of its electorate who don't want to live next to sprawling refugee camps. You have 200,000 Burundian refugees in Tanzania right now. Also, the President John Magufuli, he's pleasing his Burundian counterpart Pierre Nkurunziza with this decision. And human rights activists in both countries say that the two men have a lot in common, that they are both authoritarian leaders. So this process will begin on the 1st of October, and they're expecting to repatriate 2,000 Burundians each week. So the whole process should take up to 2 years.
So what are they going to be going back to? What is the state of affairs in Burundi currently?
Well, that really depends who you ask. The Burundian government says that the situation is peaceful and all is well now in Burundi. But if you remember, in 2015, there was a serious political crisis when Nkurunziza said that he would run for a third mandate. The opposition said that this was not constitutional, and you had widespread protests, you had clashes, more than 1,000 people were killed. And at the time, more than 400,000 people fled to neighboring countries, especially Tanzania, but also Congo and Rwanda. Today, I spoke to an opposition member from Burundi, and he told me that this decision by Tanzania was catastrophic because he said that these people fled political persecution, and he's certain that if they return tomorrow, these persecutions will continue. The UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, also gave its position. It sent a statement to AFP, and this is what it said. The situation has improved, but conditions are not currently conducive to promote returns. Hundreds still flee Burundi each month. Also, you have the NGO Human Rights Watch, which says that the Burundian government does not tolerate criticism. And Human Rights Watch says that Burundian security services carry out rape, abductions and executions. Burundi's government strongly denies this. And also, Burundi's government in the past has accused the UNHCR of inflating the number of refugees simply to receive more funds. And lastly, you need to know that last year there was a change to the constitution in Burundi, which means that Nkurunziza, who's been in power for 14 years, he can now run again for 2 mandates in theory and stay in power till 2034, even though in a recent speech a few months ago he said that he would not be a candidate in next year's presidential election.
Well, look now at some news in brief. A Zambian opposition leader has been charged with defamation after he described President Edgar Lungu as a dog. Chishimba Kambwe from the National Democratic Congress has said that comments he made in an online video were misunderstood. He was arrested just 2 days after authorities deregistered his NDC party, saying that its constitution was flawed. His supporters say that he's being intimidated. Lungu has been accused of growing increasingly authoritarian since he took over in 2015. Police fired rubber bullets and shops were set on fire in Pretoria on Wednesday as chaotic clashes broke out between taxi drivers and drug dealers. Looting reportedly began after taxi drivers confronted sellers of a drug known as Niope. Riots are believed to have begun after a driver was shot and killed. Hundreds of taxis blocked roads in the central business district, and bus services were suspended. And dozens of African leaders headed to Japan this week for the 7th TICAD, the Tokyo International Conference on African Development. Japan's keen on competing with China for influence and is boosting private sector investment in Africa. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said that enhanced insurance will be offered to cover loans to African governments or private companies buying Japanese goods for infrastructure projects on the continent. The last TCAD conference was held in Nairobi in 2016, seeing Japan pledge $30 billion of support into African development, education and healthcare. Now, Sudanese people are waiting for news about the first cabinet appointed since President Omar al-Bashir was toppled in April. Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok is set to announce his picks from candidates put forward by the Forces for Freedom and Change, the group made up of protest leaders that ushered in the recent political upheaval. A joint civilian-military sovereign council was sworn in last week to oversee a 3-year transition period. Choosing a government is a key step in moving the country on from recent unrest. The decision had been expected on Wednesday. Naba Mohideen tells us more.
Actually, the delay because of the protesters' demands and pressure that they don't want any of the political parties to be involved in the Ministers' Council, because this is the Declaration of Freedom and Change, the declaration itself that they signed before al-Bashir was ousted. So right now, people demanding that the Ministers' Council will not be involved in any political background or any political agenda, just technocrat, specialists from different backgrounds, but not political one. And so this is the delay. Whenever they name someone and he is from a political party, people protested this and push the opposition and the prime minister to just have nominees and not belonging to any political party. But the delay was expected, but not that much, because already the country is suffering from security issues like what's happening in Sudan, a core for civil war. It's not a civil war, but tribal conflicts that may develop to be a civil war, the economic situation, the floods. So any delay will impact on the protesters and the protests and the general security situation in the country.
Now about Mohideen there for us. Now, in Sierra Leone's crowded capital, slums are running out of space for new houses. People living in informal communities in Freetown often use a method called banking to create new places for new houses with tightly packed plastic waste. Newcomers can then build homes on these plastic beds of land. Our correspondents tell us more.
Like a third of Freetown's population, Coco lives in a slum. To build a home for himself, he needs land. And so he creates it with a method known as banking, using plastic waste to reclaim land from the sea.
We collect waste and turn it into solid ground. After we collect it, we cover it in soil. We then jump on it to compress the whole thing to be able to build our house on top. See, when I jump, nothing moves. It's solid stuff.
But it's risky. At the height of the rainy season, floods regularly wash away the makeshift foundations.
Sometimes we're scared because the water level rises. That's why we use sandbags to protect us from the waves.
Many slum residents have been here since the 1990s. Fleeing civil war, they left their homes in the countryside behind. Today, average wages are about €2 per day, and for most, the dream of leaving the slums remains out of reach. The countryside is undeveloped and offers few opportunities to communities, and so rural Sierra Leoneans migrate en masse to the capital.
We are here because we want to continue our education, we want to have the best medical services, we want to have a best standard of living. We are paying tax. Governments are calling that particular money. And when they are developing, they are only concentrating on the city center, but they are not concentrating on those informal settlements.
The most recent relocation attempt was in 2015. Fewer than 100 new homes were built in the outskirts, but the distance and lack of social provision meant the families soon returned to the slum. Today, there's little money for new plans.
Those areas are not environmentally friendly, and besides, they are highly disaster-prone areas. And if we decide to relocate them, we need to provide some form of capacity building, which it has a huge financial cost, which cannot just be done within the short term. That could maybe be done in the long term.
The government regularly threatens these families with eviction. They continue to live day by day, unable to plan for their own futures.
Now, Ghana is trying to diversify its economy beyond cocoa by expanding its rubber industry. The country's climate and soil is great for rubber production, and Accra is ramping up support for farmers. Take a look.
dilapidated and forgotten, this tyre factory in western Ghana could get a second chance at life. Sites like this could benefit from a Ghanaian government programme aimed at encouraging rubber production in a bid to diversify the country's economy and reduce its dependence on cocoa.
So rubber production is going to go up, and in due course, if we, with the authority, encourage them with good returns on their investment, more and more farmers will be adopting that. And that will mean that the rubber industry, a tire industry, and rubber product industry can survive.
With a factory and a massive plantation, the foreign-owned private company Ghana Rubber Estate Limited, or GREL, has been the market leader in Ghanaian rubber production for the past 50 years. GREL has an established history of helping get local farmers into the rubber business through loans and training. Thousands of farmers then sold rubber back to GREL, as it was the only buyer of raw rubber in the country. But in 2016, after an international depreciation of the price of rubber, some farmers started to sell their produce to other foreign investors.
The only way to reestablish the system, let's say, something working well, is a ban on raw material exportation.
But some rubber farmers fear the potential consequences of GREL re-establishing a monopoly in the country's rubber market, going back to a system that led to lower returns on their efforts.
The government must assist us not to make investors overusers. The rules of the game must be respected so that we all live in common.
The white sap that seeps from these tall trees is already an increasingly important part of Ghana's economy. $93.5 million worth was exported in 2017, up from $52.5 million the previous year. But the farmers whose livelihoods depend on its production will be keen to find out under what terms they will be able to sell their produce in the future, and who to.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
When it comes to healthcare, the French are extremely proud of their system.
And we have every reason to be. It's high quality, accessible, and affordable. France's système de santé is ranked amongst the best in the world.
But critics say the system is hemorrhaging money. So who pays for it? And what's its long-term prognosis?
Join us for this episode of French Connections Plus, where we check up on French healthcare.
French Connections Plus, presented by Jeannie Godula and Florence Villemino.